Namaskar, I am Dr. Nalini Avinash Wagmare, working as an associate professor at Tilak Maharashtra Vidyapeeth, Pune. Today's our topic is related to nature of state in an ancient period. Uh, this historic method being the unknown in ancient time, what was the nature of state and its aims and other things. But some valuable information collected by the books and other things also. The available evidence, however, shows that the state in the early Vedic period was still tribal. The Yadus, the Turuvas, the Bharatas, for instance, who played a prominent part in the Vedic history, had for a long time no permanent territorial basis for their states. The later moved along with the peoples of their tribes and thus only a tribal basis. In the later Vedic period, however, the state became territorial. We have clear reference to the different tribes settling down in different parts of the country and to kings becoming masters both of their people as well as their country, that is Rashtra at the time. In the later Vedic period, the emperor is described as one who rules over the earth bounded by the oceans. The different stages, however, by which the state gradually became territorial cannot be clearly visualized from the scanty evidence available to us at present. Then Vedic literature does not enable us to get any idea of what were the contemporary notions about this topic. We, however, began to get welcome light from only 4th century BC when the political thought had become fairly developed. Both Kautilya and Manu held that the state was not a loose assembly of parts, each having its own interest and moving at its own will. It was characterized by an organic unity. The king, the minister, the territory, the resources, the forts, the military forces, and the alliance constitute, according to these writers, seven constitute of the state. Later writers like Kamadanda and Sukra regarded this as a self-evident truth. And epigraphs also often describe how the kingdoms acquired by the heroes whom they acknowledge possess all the seven constitutes. So, seven constitutes means the Kautilya's Saptanga. In briefly here, we also mention the seven constitutes. Swamini king, Amatyas means ministers, constitute the central government which exercise the sovereign powers and imparted the central unity. The Rashtra, the territory, Durga, the forts, Bala, army, and the Kosha means treasury, constitutes the resources of the state. The stage of the tribal state had long passed, and so territory was regarded as an essential element of the state. Force and armed forces were necessary to defend the very existence of the state, and so are regarded as its essential constituents. Then again, the kosha is also regarded as indispensable to the very existence of the state. A large number of small states existed in the Indian subcontinent, and our political thinkers felt that the existence of none could be guaranteed for a long time unless a proper balance of power was secured by wise alliances. So, the seven constitute of the state are regarded as limbs of or angas of the body of the politic of by the Indian thinker. Some of them, like the king and and the ministers, may be more prominent than others, like the force and the allies. Each limb, however, though by itself may look unimportant, as is indispensable to the body politic, for its function cannot be efficiently discharged by any other. The state can exist and function properly if the seven limbs of its body politic become mutually integrated and cooperate with each other. No limb of the body politic can strictly be regarded as more important than any other. The body politic cannot stand if one of them is missing, just as three sticks poised properly against one another will collapse if one of them is taken away. It is thus clear that ancient Indian thinkers regarded the state as an organic whole. Force and resources also important at the time. Then it must, of course, be populated by energetic and industrious population. For the character of its peoples determines the destiny of a state more than any other fact or consideration. The territorial size of an ideal state is not discussed by our authorities. As far as the smaller kingdoms were concerned, there were no natural boundaries in India to separate them in most cases. They were usually small enough to be well governed and large enough to be self sufficient. So, what was the ideal state exist in ancient India? Whether an ideal state should consist of people of exclusively one nationality, having the same race, religion, and language, or whether it can be a composite political unity of different nationalities belong to diverse races, professing many creeds and speaking several languages is a question which has not been discussed by ancient Indian thinkers. This need not surprise us because it did not arise at all in ancient period. Then who were the number of foreigners existing at the time in ancient time? It is true that a number of foreigners like the Greeks, the Parthians, the Scythians, Kushanas, and Hunas invaded and conquered the country and settled down in it as its governors. But they did not remain foreign national with a different language, religion, and culture for a long time. Within a generation or two, all of them used to become completely Indianized and converted into Hinduism or Buddhism. They did not create any problem for the Indian states. The latter used to repose implicit confidence in their new Indianized subjects, who also used to entertain no extraterritorial loyalties. Then homogeneous or live happily. A state no doubt becomes homogeneous if there is unity of language, race, and religion among its subjects. Ancient Indian writers have not emphasis upon this point because there was no necessity whatsoever to do so. Most of the states in ancient India did not differ from their neighbors either in race or language or in religion. Hindus, Buddhists, and Jains lived in all states peacefully and harmoniously. Sanskrit was the international language and practiced and had not different from one another to such a degree as to become mutually unintelligible. Then Indianized. All the foreigners who were coming into India country used to be rapidly Indianized and completely absorbed into the Hindu community. Thus, the different states in ancient India did not at all differ in race, language, or religion. Most of them had developed into separate entities, primarily owing to individual ambition, administrative convenience, or geographical conditions. It did not, therefore, occur to our thinkers that they should emphasize upon the advisability of racial, linguistic, or religious uniformity in the population of the state. Then, what was the aims of state in ancient India? The Vedic literature does not specifically discuss the aims of ideals of state. Incidental observation made therein, however, enable us to gather that peace, order, security, and justice were regarded as the fundamental aims of the state. The king or the head of the state was to be like a god or Varuna, the upholder of the law and order. He was to punish the wicked and help the virtuous. Religion was to be promoted, morality was to be encouraged, and education was to be patronized. State, however, was to secure not only the moral but also the material well-being of the citizens. The kingdom of King Parikshit, idolized in Atharvaveda, flows with milk and honey. All-round welfare of the public was clearly regarded as the chief aim of the state during the Vedic and Upanishad ages up to the 6th century BC. Then aims of the state according to dharma, that is the main important. When the literature on politics proper began to be developed, we find that promotion of dharma, artha, and kama are usually mentioned as the aims of the state. The state was to promote dharma not by championing of any particular sect or religion, but fostering a feeling of piety and religiousness, by encouraging virtue and morality, by extending help to the established belonging to all religions and sects, by maintaining free hospitals and feeding houses for the poor, and the discipline, and last but not least, the extending patronage to literature and sciences. Then Artha and Kama. The promotion of artha was to be procured by encouraging trade, industry, and agriculture, by developing national resources, by bringing fresh land under cultivation, by building dams and canals to make agriculture independent of rain, and by encouraging extensive and systematic working of mines. The state was to promote karma by ensuring peace and order so that each individual may enjoy life undisputed and by offering encouragement to fine arts like music, dancing, painting, sculpture, architecture in order to promote aesthetic culture. The state was thus expected to maintain peace and order and promote moral, material, and aesthetic progress of the society. These are the aims of the state. Then in Purushartha also mentioned that it was business of the state to promote dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Only they have not used the modern terminology. The ideal of Sarva Bhuta Hita, which is emphasized several places, refers not only to the spiritual but also the mundane sphere. Sarva Bhuta, welfare of the all is the aims of the state. Then Varna Dharma. The state no doubt claimed to be champion of Varna Dharma, but it did not support the Brahmanas' claim to their exemption from the taxation and the capital punishment. It is extremely doubtful whether many cases occurred in ancient India of state punishing Shudras and Brahmana women for pursuing to study the Vedas. The prohibition was regarded by the society, including the Shudras, as divinely ordained, and as there was no material benefit whatsoever to be gained by its violation, there was no incentive. Then the dharma, the state sought to be encouraged dharma by promoting piety and religious, by extending equal patronage to all sects and religions and their establishment, by financing works of public utility like tanks, canals, well, poor houses, hospitals, and not by becoming an instrument in the hands of church or the priest. Is ancient Indian state a theocratic one? To the end of the Brahmana period, 1000 BC, the priest tried to extend their sway over the monarch and throw him over the state. It is natural that many kings should have opposed this tendency. The bitter causes that are pronounced against the rulers who confiscate the cows, that is wealth of the Brahmana, seems to be directed against those monarchs who were opposing the efforts of the priests to forget a theocratic state, where their voice was to be supreme. Unfortunately, we have no detailed information about any specific and individual cases as we have in the case of early medieval Europe. Then the in the course of time, however, the church and state or the Brahmanas and Kshatriya made up their quarrel. It was realized that two could proper only if they cooperate with each other. Each considered a qualified divinity to the other. As both realized that they could prosper only if there was complete harmony between them. So these things we find in ancient time. Then the royal Purohita knew rituals which could either promote or retard the welfare of the king and the state. The aim of the government, as shown already, was to promote dharma, and the laws which it enforced were regarded as a divine in origin or inspiration. Varnashrama dharma, which the state had to enforce, was largely molded by the priests, who were the writers of the books on this subject. Some Situate state, ancient Indian stated theocratic to some extent. Uh, we have, however, no limits of the theocracy and period during which it was operated. The claims that have been put forth on behalf of Brahmanas in the Brahmanical literature to be a great extent exaggerated. They represent the wish to more than reality. There is no doubt that the influence of the royal champion over the king was great during the age of Vedas and Brahmanas. Then Brahmana literature, a passage in the Taittiriya Brahmana confirms that a king at his feet will can lord it over the Brahmanas. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad status in society, the Brahmana sits lower than the next to the king. Generally speaking, the priest was treated with decorum, spiritual help offered by his rituals and sacrifice welcome. But the king was far from becoming a mere instrument in the hands of the priest. Brahmanas no doubt claimed a number of privileges, including exemption from the taxes and capital punishment. So, divinity of the king. In the course of time, the divinity of king was recognized. This, however, did not make the king infallible, even the sole interpreter of the divine will. Laws, though regarded as divine, were really based upon social customs and tradition. So, by sanctioning their operation, the state did not become an instrument in the hands of the church or the priest. It rather became mouthpiece of the social will. In 4th century BC, the influence of theocracy on the state began to decline further. The Vedic sacrifices themselves fell into disgrace and disuse, which naturally undermined the influence of the champion. Politics developed into special science and princely naturally studied. Then it is also one more reason. Then positive law began to be differentiated from religious rituals and traditional customs. The school of politics began to avert that the former was more important than the latter. Hindu polity thus succeeded in emancipating itself from the leading strings of theology by beginning of the Christian era. So the king was no doubt regarded as a protector and enforcer of dharma, but we have shown already this how this did not make the state theocratic. His duty was to promote piety and religious by extending equal patronage to all sects and religion and enforce customary law approved by the social conscience. He discharged his functions to the officers like the Dharma Mahamatras and Vidnaya Sti Padakas. He was not to be an agent of particular religion or sect working to promote its interest or seeking to carry out its commands. The crusade of Hindu state against Buddhism, Jainism is rarely met with the ancient Indian history. The influence of the religious concept on politics. The influence of theological, religions, philosophical concept on Hindu polity may be briefly noticed here. The concept dharma as the ultimate and supreme power was responsible for the king being struck by the dharma danda thrice on the occasion of his coronation. It was also responsible for the exhortation to him to lead his whole life as a dedicated to duty, Dutta Vrata. The duties of the king were considered as Raj Dharma. The violation of Dharma was ultimately punishable by God. So the king became ultimately accountable to God, who was to punish him in a suitable manner. Our political writers, therefore, usually did not encourage the subject to seek punish the king for his misdoing. Then the doctrine of karma also has left some influence on the polity. The usual view, however, was that a person reaps as he sows. This was response for the threat for a long sojourn in hell held before a vicious king or false witness. Then Dharma Yuddha. The theory of the supremacy of the moral order suggested the ideal of a moral state which should have no sinners or thieves among its subjects. It was also responsible for the renaissance of the code of righteous war, that is Dharma Yuddha, which was followed by, to some extent, at one stage of our history. The state was to strive for the realization of moral and religious ideals, along with those in the space of social and economic life. It was thus to secure both the moral and material development of people and the country. That's why the Dharma Yuddha took place at that time. Then the Gita preached that the theory that God is omnipresent and is the giver of all good things has left its own influence here and there on the polity. The Gita preached that whatever is preeminent, striking, or brilliant is particularly surcharged with the divine presence and illustrate the point by recognizing divinity in the king. Then divine guardian. Ultimately, the king began to be regarded as a divine guardian. When the theory of incarnation became popular, the king was regarded as an incarnation of Vishnu. Some kings, some kings regarded their kingdom as gift from God. The other states, like the Republic of Yaduvas, regarded themselves as presided over by their favorite deity like Kartika. So there is no evidence to show that the rulers in these cases regarded themselves as agents of the god. All this was a natural consequence of regarding God as the giver of all good things and protector of all good persons or the states. Upper grace responsible for the ideal of self-denial place before the king. The freedom from taxation that was conceded to Vyas and pure Brahmanas due to the view that those who practice a parigraha should not be made to bear avoidable economic burdens. In conclusion, we can say that uh, religious and philosophical dogmas and concepts did not deeply influence the Hindu political thought, practice, and institutions. So, in this lecture, we have studied the king, nature of state, then functions of state, uh, briefly mentioned in this lecture. So, in conclusion, to conclude, we have to admit that religion, philosophical dogmas, and concept did not deeply influence the Hindu political thought and practices which existed in Western at the time more as compared to India. So, these are the reference book you can refer for more information. Altikar book, State Government in Ancient India, and Dian book also.